I do think that Canadians kind of tend to look at the world differently. They look at the world as a kind of a threatening place. Now, I don't know if that's the tradition of ice and snow and weather and all that stuff, but I do think that that has something to do with it. And I think the horror movie is kind of, in a way, is kind of a natural extension of this Canadian skepticism and fear about the way the world operates. I mean, one of the characteristics is that, you know, you don't see very many monster movies in the Canadian horror tradition.
You have to be rooted, in other words, have a sense of security in order for the monster, whatever it is, to come and attack that. We don't have that. So our monsters from the id, to use that phrase, are sort of like driving us away from our roots, out of the house, out of places of comfort, and they drive us out of our bodies by invading our bodies and pushing our soul out, like in Cronenberg movies, or they drive us out into the cornfields or the wheat fields, and it's all best symbolized in Black Christmas, where the killer's in the house. Get out of the house.
The calls are coming from the house.
If you're looking at Canadian horror, the thing that's probably going to stand out is the usual man against nature, okay? Ginger Snaps, it's set in an urban setting, but man against nature, and you've got the werewolves coming in there.
Don't you just love the sound of nature?
There's a great film by William Fruet, Death Weekend, and it's that couple out in the wilderness, you know. Sure, it's man against man, but they're isolated too, and that whole theme of isolation runs through a lot of Canadian films. Rituals is another one, and we Canadians seem to do that wilderness thing very well. Even a film like Black Christmas, one of my favorite things about it is when they're doing a search of the park, it's outside and it's damn cold, and it's not in the studio. It's not studio cold and little snow soap suds on the floor, on the ground, to make it look like snow. They're out in the cold, and every time someone takes a breath, there's a big puff of, you know, steam and vapor coming out there, and you go, oh, it's so cold. And that's one of the things that you can see in a Canadian film that you don't see a lot of other places.
I think the things that really kind of typify Canadian horror are atmosphere, you know, and kind of an atmosphere of dread, more than you know, special effects, heavy blood spurting. We have a little bit of blood in our films, but if you look at something like Black Christmas, which is kind of a seminal Canadian horror film, there's very little blood in that film. There are some things in that movie that are really effective. I mean, the POV shot at the beginning of that film is really scary because you don't know what it is. The thing is, if you're actually into the movie, if you're actually letting yourself kind of go into that little weird world that Bob Clark has created there, the POV scene at the beginning of the film is like, I don't know, is it some kind of weird spirit? Is it a dog? I don't know what it is. Black Christmas is important to Canadian horror history because I think it's one of the most successful Canadian horror films of all time, even though it was directed by an American. But it is an example of a tax dodge film that actually was pretty good and made some money and was relatively successful both here in the U.S. But I think more importantly, it did kind of set the example or create a template for slasher films.
Who is that? Claude? Who is it?
Black Christmas is sort of the quintessential Canadian horror movie, but further than that, it's the quintessential slasher movie. You know, you see all of these movies made nowadays, and yes, they've got all of that stuff. You don't know who the killer is, the people are getting chopped up, you know, the promiscuous teens are the ones to go. And although there's not really that in Black Christmas, the teenager who's pregnant actually survives, so that goes against stereotypes of slasher films. But all of the elements that you would see in Halloween or Friday the 13th, and all of those films were set down in Black Christmas.
American films often take a very moral approach to things, where Canadian films do not. You know, the genre stereotype of the slutty girl always gets killed first. The guys who are smoking pot get killed first. That doesn't happen at all in Canadian films. Anyone can die. In Black Christmas, the strongest character is having an abortion. In an American film, she'd pretty much be the first. That's a very distinct kind of thing, and it makes the films a lot scarier because, you know, you aren't sitting there going, oh, she's gonna get it, or oh, he's next. Any character could be next, and that's really, you know, what a horror film should be. It should be creating that kind of suspense for you.
I'm going to kill you. It really made a splash, and you know, it's really strange because so many people remember that movie, have very, very strong memories of that movie and how it affected them. The girl in the attic with the bag over her face, it was just this thing that just keeps coming back all the time, and it was just a very, very kind of traumatic image.
The moment where the kind of drunken sorority mother or whatever she is goes looking for the cat and sticks her head through precisely the wrong hole at the top of the stairs at the wrong moment.
Claude!
That was the one where I still remember collectively an audience going about 2 feet out of its seat.
For me, the scariest moment in Black Christmas is when Olivia Hussey creeps up. She looks into the room to see all her friends dead, and behind the door, through the crack in the door, there's suddenly this wide red eye looking out at her, and she just runs, and there's this figure behind her. It's a really terrifying, climactic kind of moment.
Agnes, it's me, Billy.
This buddy of mine and I, in school, we went to see the film together, and then for ages afterwards, we would try to scare each other by calling each other up and saying, "Hello, Agnes, this is Billy," and using that voice. And it's become kind of an in-joke between the two of us for the years. Anyway, but a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I was out having dinner with some friends, and this well-known Canadian actor named Nick Mancuso was with us. Nick and I are old friends. And the subject of Canadian horror movies came up. So we're talking about them all. Of course, Black Christmas comes up, and everyone at the table is like, oh, well, that's a classic. We loved it. And we're all talking about our favorite parts. And I bring up the voice on the phone, and I say, "Hello, Agnes, this is Billy. I love that voice." And Nick says, "It's Belloc." And I said, "No, it's Billy." And he said, "Oh, no, it's Belloc." I said, "Nick, I've seen this movie a lot of times, and I've been doing this voice. You know, it's Hello, Agnes, this is Billy." And he says, "No, it's Hello, Agnes, this is Belloc, because that's my voice."
How did you die? Father, help.
That is definitely a classic movie. I mean, it's a brilliant movie. I remember, the thing I remember most about The Changeling, I think most people tell you this, is the poster with the little kid on it, you know, the empty wheelchair with the shadow, with the little kid sitting on the wheelchair, you know, which is incredibly, incredibly creepy. It was just unbelievable. I mean, ghost movies actually are, I think they cross over in a way that other horror movies can't, because ghost movies are very tied into kind of like, you know, the whole thing about telling a ghost story by the fire.
Joseph, did you die in this house?
The thing that makes The Changeling a good horror film is that it's about ghosts. Now, most people will admit to saying, you know what, I think I saw a ghost, or, you know, or have a ghost story that their grandmother used to tell them, like, you know, our house was haunted and stuff. And you don't get looked at it like you're a complete freak if you say, you know, I think that ghosts might possibly exist. But if you know, if you sat at a dinner table and said, you know what, I think Jason Voorhees lives next door to me, and I saw him with an axe coming at me, people would think that you're a little...
What I remember most about The Changeling was thinking at that point in time that there was no ghost in that house that could possibly be more frightening than George C. Scott was, right? So I was saying, all he had to do was yell up those stairs, and I figured they'd all be gone.
What do you want from me?